Have you ever held something in your hand that felt heavier than it should? Not because of its weight, but because of everything it meant. That's how it was for Isaiah. Standing on the porch of the house on Willow Street, his small fingers wrapped tight around a brass key that seemed to carry the weight of his whole family's story. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink, and for a moment, the world felt gentle. But even in that quiet, you could feel something watching, waiting, just out of sight. Welcome to Injustice Browning. I'm Mark Joie. If you believe stories like this matter, subscribe and join the conversation below. Your voice is part of this fight. Isaiah was only 10, but he already understood that this house was more than just a place to sleep. It was the dream his mother, Ruth, whispered about late at night when she thought he was asleep. It was the promise his grandfather, Samuel, made to himself when he left the South with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. Every nail, every floorboard, every faded photograph on the wall was a piece of their hope, hammered in with sacrifice and stubborn faith. Ruth worked long hours at the hospital, her hands always tired, her smile always soft. She'd come home and sit on the porch with Isaiah, telling him stories about the house, how Samuel had worked 2 jobs for years, one at the factory, one cleaning offices after midnight just to save enough for a down payment, how he'd face men who spat at his feet, who called him names, who told him he'd never belong. But Samuel never let them see him break. He'd just keep his head high, his voice steady, and say, "This house is ours. No one can take that from us." But the neighborhood didn't make it easy. Most of the houses on Willow Street were painted in the same pale colors, with neat lawns and American flags fluttering in the breeze. The people who lived there watched the new family with eyes that never quite softened. At first, it was just the little things: a neighbor who crossed the street instead of saying hello, a mailbox knocked over in the night, a cold silence at the grocery store. Isaiah felt it. Even if he couldn't name it, he'd see the way his mother's shoulders tensed when she walked him to school, the way Samuel's jaw clenched when someone stared along. Still, they tried to make it home. Ruth planted sunflowers by the front steps. Samuel fixed the squeaky gate. Isaiah rode his bike up and down the block, waving at anyone who looked his way. There were moments when it almost felt normal, when laughter filled the kitchen, when the smell of cornbread drifted through the open windows, when Isaiah's friends from church came over to play. But always, just beneath the surface, was that feeling of being watched, of being measured and found wanting. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the streetlights flickered on, Isaiah sat on the porch steps, the brass key warm in his palm. He heard footsteps, quick and angry, then the sharp crash of glass. A brick smashed through the front window, spraying shards across the living room. Isaiah froze, heart pounding, as Ruth ran to him, pulling him close. On the wall, scrawled in jagged letters, was a word he'd only ever heard whispered, a word that burned hotter than the broken glass. Ruth held him tight, her voice shaking as she tried to soothe him. "It's just a word, baby. It can't hurt us." But Isaiah knew better. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way Samuel's hands trembled as he swept up the glass. That night, as he lay in bed, Isaiah stared at the ceiling and wondered, why do they hate us for just wanting a home? Why does something as simple as a key feel so heavy? The innocence of Willow Street was gone, replaced by a question that would haunt Isaiah for years. And in that silence, the story of his family's fight for dignity had only just begun. Some stories are too heavy to tell all at once. They come out in pieces, late at night, when the world is quiet and the weight of memory presses down. That's how it was for Samuel. He waited until the house was still, the broken window patched. Isaiah curled up beside him on the old couch. The boy's eyes were wide, searching for answers. And Samuel knew it was time to share the truth that lived in his bones. He started with the South. Not the South you see in postcards, but the one he grew up in, where the air was thick with heat and fear, and the rules were written in blood. Samuel spoke of sundown towns, places where a black man could disappear if he was caught after dark. He remembered the signs, colored only, no Negroes allowed, painted bold as warnings, reminders that some doors would never open for him, no matter how hard he knocked. He told Isaiah about the nights he'd walk home from work, heart pounding, every shadow a threat, every stranger a question mark. He learned to keep his head down, to move quick, to never look back. Samuel's voice was steady, but Isaiah could hear the pain underneath. He asked, "Grandpa, why didn't you just leave?" Samuel smiled, a sad, tired smile. I did, son. That's why I came north. I thought things would be different here. He described the train ride, the suitcase packed with everything he owned, the promise of a new beginning. He remembered the first time he saw the house on Willow Street, how it stood tall and proud, sunlight glinting off the windows. For a moment, he believed he'd outrun the past, but the North had its own ways of keeping people in their place. Samuel explained redlining, how banks drew invisible lines on maps, deciding which neighborhoods black families could live in, which homes they could buy, which dreams they could chase. He talked about job interviews where the answer was always "we'll call you," but the phone never rang. He remembered the police, how they'd stop him for walking too slow, for looking out of place, for nothing at all. They didn't need a reason, Samuel said. Just my skin was enough. Isaiah listened, his small hands twisting. In his lap, he asked, "Didn't anybody help?" Samuel shook his head. Some tried. Most just looked away. He spoke of friends who'd come north with him, men and women who worked themselves to the bone, who built lives out of scraps and hope. Some made it, some didn't. He remembered a friend named Henry, who was beaten for trying to vote, a cousin, Leela, who lost her job for speaking up. Names and faces flickered through Samuel's mind, each one a story cut short. But through it all, Samuel held onto the house. He told Isaiah, "This place, it's more than walls and a roof. It's proof that we belong, that we survived, that we matter." He looked around the living room, at the faded photos on the mantel, at the patch of sunlight on the floor. Every time they tried to push us out, we stayed. Every time they said we didn't belong, we proved them wrong. His voice grew quiet, thick with memory. "I wanted you to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere you could just be a boy, not a problem to be solved." He wiped his eyes, rough hands trembling. "But I can't protect you from everything. I wish I could." Isaiah reached for his grandfather's hand, holding it tight. He didn't have the words to answer all that pain, but he understood something new, that the house was built on more than money. It was built on sacrifice, on dreams carried north in battered suitcases, on the stubborn hope that things could be better. He saw the pride in Samuel's eyes, but also the grief of friends who never made it, the dreams that never came true. Samuel's tears fell quietly, each one a memory, a name, a promise. Isaiah sat beside him, silent, letting the weight of history settle on his shoulders. He knew now that the fight for home was never just about a house. It was about dignity, about belonging, about refusing to be erased. And as the night deepened, Isaiah made a silent vow. He would carry that weight, too. He would remember. He would not let their story be forgotten. It happened on a night that should have been ordinary. The air was thick and still, the kind of summer heat that makes the world feel heavy. Isaiah was in his room, drifting between sleep and the soft hum of the fan, when the sirens shattered the quiet. Blue and red lights flashed through the curtains, painting the walls in frantic color. He heard shouting, the crackle of a radio, the distant roar of flames. Then came the pounding on the door. Ruth rushed to answer, her heart already racing. Outside, chaos had taken over. Smoke billowed from the house next door, flames licking the sky. Neighbors gathered in clusters, their faces twisted with fear and suspicion. Someone pointed. Isaiah saw it through the window, the way a finger jabbed in their direction, the way eyes narrowed and mouths moved in angry whispers. The police arrived fast, but not for comfort. They moved with purpose, hands on holsters, eyes cold and hard. One officer barked questions before Ruth could even speak. "Where were you tonight? Did you see anything? Who else was in the house?" Ruth tried to answer, her voice shaking, but they barely listened. Another officer turned to Isaiah, his gaze sharp. "Come here, son." Isaiah's legs felt like stone, but he obeyed. He'd been taught to do what he was told, to keep his hands visible, to never talk back. Then, without warning, cold metal snapped around his wrists. Handcuffs. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. He looked for his mother, but she was surrounded by officers, her words drowned out by their questions. The neighbors watched, some with satisfaction, others with something like pity. No one spoke up. No one said, "This isn't right." Ruth's voice broke through the noise, desperate and raw. "He's just a child. He didn't do anything." But the officers ignored her, leading Isaiah down the steps, past the crowd, into the glare of headlights. The world spun, and all Isaiah could think was, why me? Why us? He saw the faces of his classmates, his teachers, the people who'd never really seen him at all, Now they saw only a suspect inside the police car. Isaiah's hands shook. He tried to remember what his grandfather had told him. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason. But fear burned in his chest, hot and wild. He wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Instead, he sat in silence, the weight of the cuffs digging into his skin. Back on the porch, Ruth pleaded with the officers. We were home all night. Ask anyone. My father's inside. He's sick. He can't even walk without help. Please, just listen. But the officers had already made up their minds. They took notes, nodded at the neighbors, and left Ruth standing, alone, her dignity stripped away in front of everyone. The next morning, the story spread like wildfire. Whispers at the grocery store, stares at the bus stop, a coldness that settled over the block. The family's name was dragged through the mud, their innocence buried under suspicion. No one cared that there was no evidence, no motive, nothing but a rumor and a long history of blame. Samuel sat by the window, watching the world pass by. He'd seen this before, how quickly a community could turn, how easily a family could become the enemy. He felt the old anger rise up, bitter and sharp. All it takes is one lie, he muttered, and they'll take everything. Isaiah came home, his wrists still red from the cuffs. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Ruth saw the shame in his eyes, the way he flinched at every sound. She knelt beside him, her hands gentle on his shoulders. This isn't your fault, she whispered. Don't you ever believe it is. But the damage was done. The family felt it in every sideways glance, every door that stayed closed, every invitation that never came. The world had shrunk, the walls closing in. Fear and rage twisted together, a knot that wouldn't come loose. That night, Ruth sat at the kitchen table, her fists clenched, her jaw set. She looked at her son, at her father, at the house they'd fought so hard to keep. They want us to be afraid, she said, her voice low and steady. They want us to give up, but I won't. I'm going to fight. I'm going to clear our name, and I swear, I will protect you, no matter what it takes. In that moment, something shifted. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something stronger, a resolve that would not break. The fire next door had tried to destroy them, but it had only made their will burn brighter. And as the night stretched on, the family prepared for the battle ahead, knowing that the fight for dignity was far from over. The first time Ruth met Miss Carter, she felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. Miss Carter was sharp-eyed, calm, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that made you believe she'd seen the worst and survived it. She really listened to Ruth's story, to Isaiah's trembling voice, to Samuel's weary sighs. She didn't promise miracles. She promised to fight. But the fight was nothing like Ruth imagined. The courthouse was cold, the walls high and unforgiving. Every time they walked through those doors, Ruth felt the eyes on her, some curious, some hostile, some just waiting for her to fail. The prosecutor wasted no time painting a picture, a family with a history of trouble, a boy in the wrong place at the wrong time, a mother with a chip on her shoulder. The words stung. But what hurt more was how easily people believed them. Witnesses took the stand and lied. A neighbor swore he saw Isaiah near the burning house, even though Isaiah had been home, sitting at the kitchen table with his grandfather. Another neighbor claimed Ruth had argued with the family next door, twisting a simple disagreement about a parking space into something ugly. Miss Carter objected, but the judge barely looked up. The truth felt slippery, always just out of reach. Isaiah sat in the courtroom, his hands folded tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He heard the whispers, the snickers, the way people looked at him like he was already guilty. Ruth wanted to shield him, to pull him close and never let go. But all she could do was squeeze his hand and hope he felt her love through the storm. The cost of the fight grew heavier every day. Bills piled up, legal fees, missed work, repairs. To the house, Ruth's friends stopped calling. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. At night, she lay awake, listening to Samuel's cough echo down the hall, wondering how much more they could take. Samuel, once so strong, seemed to shrink under the weight of it all. He moved slower, spoke less, his eyes clouded with worry and exhaustion. Ms. Carter faced her own battles. She was the only black lawyer in the courthouse most days, and she felt the stares, the dismissive glances, the way her objections were brushed aside. But she never let it show. She worked late, combing through police reports, interviewing witnesses, searching for anything that could prove the family's innocence. She told Ruth, They want us to give up. That's how they win. But I won't let them. There were moments when hope flickered. Miss Carter found a maintenance report buried in city records evidence that the house next door had faulty wiring, that the fire had started in the walls, not from outside. She brought in an expert, a quiet man with soot-stained hands, who explained how old wires could spark a blaze in seconds. The prosecutor tried to dismiss it, but Miss Carter pressed on, her voice steady, her questions sharp. Still, the courtroom was a battlefield. The prosecutor played on fear, hinting at unspoken tensions in the neighborhood, painting the family as outsiders, troublemakers. Ruth felt the sting of every word, the way the jury's eyes narrowed, the way the judge's patience wore thin. She wondered if the truth would ever matter, if justice was just another word for not for us. Isaiah's name was dragged through the mud at school. Kids whispered behind his back. Teachers watched him with suspicion. He stopped riding his bike, stopped waving at neighbors. The world had become smaller, meaner, and he felt it every time he left the house. Samuel's health faltered. The stress wore him down, his body aching with old wounds and new fears. He tried to be strong for Ruth and Isaiah, but some days he just sat by the window, staring at the street, lost in memories of battles fought and lost. But through it all, the family held on. Ruth refused to let the shame stick. She walked into court every day with her head high, her son by her side, her father's words echoing in her heart. Miss Carter fought for them like they were her own family, refusing to let the system grind them down. The final day in court felt endless. Miss Carter laid out the evidence piece by piece, her voice unwavering. She showed the jury the maintenance report, the expert's testimony, the timeline that proved Isaiah couldn't have been near the fire. She spoke of dignity, of the right to be seen as human, not just a suspect. The judge's decision came down like a slow, heavy rain. There is no evidence to support the charges against this family. Their names are cleared. Relief washed over Ruth, so sharp it almost hurt. Isaiah wept, silent tears running down his cheeks. Samuel closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his face, but the scars remained. The whispers didn't stop overnight. The bills still needed paying. The trust that had been broken would take years to rebuild. Yet, as they walked out of the courthouse, heads held high, Ruth knew they had survived something meant to destroy them. Their dignity was battered, but not broken, and in that moment, she realized that justice, slow and imperfect as it was, had not stolen their hope. They had fought for their name, for their home, for each other, and they had won, even if the world refused to see it. The house on Willow Street looked the same as it always had, but when the family stepped through the door, everything felt different. The air was thick with memories, some sharp and painful, others soft and warm. The walls still bore the faint scars of the past months, but the house stood, solid and waiting, just as it always had. Ruth paused in the doorway, letting the quiet settle over her. She closed her eyes and breathed in the familiar scent of home coffee, old wood, a hint of Samuel's aftershave. For a moment, she let herself feel the relief, the exhaustion, the stubborn pride that had carried them through. Samuel moved slower now, but his eyes were bright. He called Isaiah to his side, his hand trembling just a little as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key. He pressed it into Isaiah's palm, closing the boy's fingers around it. "This key," Samuel said, his voice rough but steady, "is more than just a way to open the door. It's every mile I walked, every job I worked, every time I was told no and kept going anyway. It's your mother's courage, your grandmother's prayers, and your own heart. This house is ours because we never gave up, and now it's yours to protect." Isaiah looked down at the key, feeling its weight in a new way. He remembered the fear, the shame, the anger, but also the laughter in the kitchen, the stories on the porch, the way his family held each other up when the world tried to knock them down. He understood, maybe for the first time, that their story wasn't just about what they'd survived. It was about what they'd built together, and the love that held it all in place. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Some people still looked away when Ruth passed by, their faces tight with discomfort or guilt. But a few neighbors, the ones who'd watched in silence, found the courage to cross the street. They offered quiet apologies, awkward but sincere. One woman brought over a pie, her hands shaking as she set it on the porch. Another man, who'd never spoken more than a word, nodded at Samuel and said, "I'm sorry for what you went through. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a start, a crack in the wall that had kept them apart." Ruth decided she wouldn't let fear or bitterness take root in her home. She put up flyers for a block party, inviting everyone, old friends, new faces, even the ones who turned away. She cooked for days, filling the house with the smell of fried chicken and sweet potato pie. She set up tables in the yard, strung lights from the porch, and played music loud enough to drown out the silence that had settled over the street at first. People came in small groups, hesitant and unsure. But as the sun dipped low and laughter began to rise, the barrier started to fall. Children ran through the yard, chasing each other between the tables. Neighbors shared stories, some for the first time. Ruth watched it all, her heart swelling. With something like hope, she knew not everyone would change, not every wound would heal. But she refused to let hate decide the future of her family or her street. Isaiah stood on the porch, the brass key warm in his hand. He looked out at the crowd, at his mother's smile, at his grandfather's proud eyes. He felt the weight of the key, but it didn't scare him anymore. It felt like a promise, a reminder that no matter what the world threw at them, they would stand together. He understood now that dignity wasn't something anyone could give or take away. It was something you carried, quietly and fiercely, through every trial and every triumph. As the night wore on and the music drifted into the dark, Isaiah slipped the key into his pocket. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more moments when the world tried to tell him he didn't belong. But he also knew the truth. Justice is never easy, and sometimes it comes late. But dignity is a light that never goes out. Every home, every family deserves respect, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door, hold your head high, and let the world see you unbroken, unafraid, and still standing. If you've listened this far, you know this story isn't just about one family on Willow Street. It's about the weight so many have carried, the battles fought behind closed doors, the quiet strength it takes just to keep going when the world seems set against you. Isaiah's family could be any family, maybe even yours, or someone you pass every day without a second thought. Their pain, their hope, their fight for dignity, it's woven into the history of this country, and it's still happening right now in neighborhoods just like this one. Maybe you've never had to wonder if you belong somewhere. Maybe you've never felt the sting of suspicion or the cold shoulder of a neighbor who won't meet your eyes. But for millions, that's not just a story, it's a daily reality. It's the job you don't get, the loan you're denied, the way your child is treated at school, the way your family is watched, judged, and sometimes blamed for things you didn't do. It's the fear that one accusation, one rumor, could take everything you've worked for and turn it to dust. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Change starts with really seeing the people around us. It starts with asking ourselves hard questions. What stories do we believe without proof? Who do we cross the street to avoid? Whose pain do we ignore because it's easier not to look? It starts with listening, with speaking up, with refusing to let hate or fear decide who belongs and who doesn't. If you felt something listening to Isaiah's story, don't let it fade when the video ends. Let it move you. Let it challenge you. Stand up when you see injustice, even if your voice shakes. Reach out to your neighbors, even if it feels awkward. Teach your children to see the humanity in every face, to value every story, to know that dignity is not a gift, it's a right. The fight for justice isn't over. It's in every courtroom, every classroom, every block where someone is told they don't belong, but every act of courage, every refusal to give in to hate, every time someone chooses empathy over indifference, we get a little closer to the world we all deserve. A world where every child can hold their family's key with pride, knowing that their home, their story, their life matters. So, if you believe in that world, join us. Subscribe to Injustice Browin. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell your story or listen to someone else's, because the more we speak, the more we listen, the more we refuse to look away, the stronger we become, and maybe, just maybe, we'll build a future where no one has to carry the weight of that Kialo.